1988 black.
Okay, that would be me. That's when Karen Sims appeared on the scene. So in 1988, I was hired by the BLM as a student biologist from the U of A and began my career with BLM. And at that time that I was hired was right as BLM acquired Las Cienegas. At that time, it was just the Empire Ranch. In the 1987 Phoenix Resource Management Plan, which is how they brought this into public land management, they designated what's now Las Cienegas as the Empire Cienega Resource Conservation Area. So that's what its first designation was, and that designation simply meant it was a block of public lands we were going to retain and manage, and not necessarily for conservation emphasis, but just that we keep it intact. Jeff and I moved out to the Empire Ranch headquarters, the field station, in August of 1988. It was very rainy, and the grass was over the top of our knees. Lots of places you couldn't get to because the roads were really flooded. At that time, there was one greyhawk pair that we were able to detect at the Empire Ranch headquarters. And at that time, the Empire Gulch Spring stopped before the current road crossing, and it was completely denuded. It was part of the shipping corrals, and just a very, very different place than we have there today. And right after that, I'll just skip right to here, and then I'll let Julia take over. The BLM Tucson field office was really officially established in 1990. Before that, we were just a sort of informal BLM office in Tucson with just a few employees, and that's when we project office kind of thing. So, and I guess the other thing that's important to note is because Jeff and I lived out there for about 3.5 years, and BLM wasn't entirely sure what to do with us at the time. Jeff was a volunteer and I was working full time. We were able to spend our time doing a lot of baseline surveys on the area, including doing a full mapping of all the aquatic habitats and fish along the creek, and a lot of vegetation collections and other baseline surveys. I don't know who's next.
Well, how about the brown at the bottom?
So that'd be Jeff. I may have said some of what he would have said.
You might have. Let's see. I've got, it's closer to 98, the stream restoration for Cienega Creek ag fields. What we learned from that is the drought affected by drought, we really didn't get the revegetation we expected after the restoration work. So we did it in 98, and that's about when the drought kicked in. We didn't get any floods or good soil moisture. So we had some areas that were fairly well vegetated because there's an artesian spring that feeds the Cienega. So about half of it revegetated, the other half didn't. We did inventory of fish macro habitats, and we came up with some interesting data. We had thousands of top minnow per mile of habitat when we did the survey. And that was all visual. It was not uncommon to see little schools of 100+ fish, and over a mile you'd have thousands, probably tens or hundreds of thousands. Surface water was 10+ miles in 1990. And these days it's down to 5 to 7 depending on the year. So we've seen a big decrease in surface water. And the tree canopy was very sparse in 1990. By 2010 it was high enough to cause swamps to be forming in the southern end of the creek. And those swamps are expanding, so we're losing our herbaceous marshy habitat and having tree swamps replace them. And that might be one of the results of not having beaver in the system, which regulate tree density to some degree.
Julia?
I think I need to mention the 1983 flood. Because the flood created so much recharge along Cienega Creek that there were portions of the stream that might have been thought of as ephemeral, that they flowed for several years afterwards. And part of the significance was that in the 80s, later on, there was a development corporation just south of the interstate highway that proposed and successfully got into the county comprehensive plan a new satellite city that would have been for 12,000 units. And that was a development that was interposed between the upper perennial reach in the La Cienegas, what would become La Cienegas, and the lower reach. And we had conflicts over whether they needed to have surface water rights because they were pumping there. They proposed to pump there the water supply for this new development. And we said they needed surface water rights, and we have the surface water rights downstream that affect us. But it turned out the DWR said, no, actually they're pumping in the ephemeral reach, and there's not a direct hydraulic connection, which is the legal standard at the time that they were applying. And so the best that we could get out of that was really a requirement that they would do monitoring of the stream flow. So that became the first type of wet-dry mapping. And at that time they did the wet-dry mapping of Cienega Creek through aerial flights. But at the same time, there was a lot of cottonwood willow resurgence, or a lot of places along the lower Cienega were becoming so canopied with cottonwood and willow that you couldn't see the stream anymore. And so after, and almost concurrent with some of the aerial surveys, PAG started their work on stream flow monitoring in the lower reach. So we had another large flood in 1988. It showed that, yeah, the stream would continue to get floods and move around, and patches of cottonwood willow would get blown out. They would resurge. We had a very acute drought in 1989. We finally got the livestock out of Cienega Creek in 1992. But even before that, when we had acquired it from rancher Walter Armour, there was a 5-year period of reduced grazing. And during that time period, we saw lots of cottonwood willow recruitment and deer grass, and pools started to form. These were the first pools that his ranch manager, Roberto Elias, remembered. They had ranched that area for probably the 20 years before that, and they had never seen pools and cattails there before, and deer grass stabilizing the stream. So it was a pretty big change geomorphically to what was going on, and it started even before they got the livestock out. And then, as I said, we finally got the certificate in 1993 for the in-stream flows.